with those kind of contexts in mind, let's do our little case study and look at Nanook of the North. It's rather unique, and I ask you to watch a couple clips, and I'll show you a couple more in class today. It's a 1922 black and white silent film, so it's a lot different and in some ways difficult to watch when we're used to our fast editing and action today. But it's really interesting in how it's shaped our imagination, not just ours, but Western societies and even around the world. The imagination of people's, how that they perceive what culture is like originally in the Arctic regions. And when we talk about the Arctic region, it's the name Arctic actually comes from the Big Dipper. The idea that the Big Dipper forms the back of the Great Bear. And in Greek, Arctos means bear. And that has been generalized to relate to Arctic. And the Arctic region is just around the North Pole, if you will, with the Arctic ice. But also you can see how it captures the northern continents as well, too. So we get most of Russia, Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries, almost all of Greenland, which we'll get back to a little later, Northern Canada, and Alaska, too. And Alaska was the focus of The Real Engine, that Neil Diamond, the documentary producer and director that we watched on Tuesday. So Nanook comes for us out of the Arctic region over here near the Hudson Bay. And in 1922, you can imagine films were extremely popular. You didn't have television, you had radio, and you had film, right? So this is like, it was a real big deal. If you wanted to go see a movie, you would go to the theater and see it. Well, it ran for 6 months straight in Paris and London and was just this huge international hit. It was re-shown later because it was so popular in 48 and 51 in both Europe and America. And then it was made again as a television show following World War II so that people could watch it again. I actually remember watching it as a kid myself, which was much later than this period, but still, it was still, you could still find it on television in the 60s and 70s. The thing that was interesting about it, it was that Robert Flaherty was the director and producer of this movie. He's the guy that made it. This was the very first documentary. That we'd never had documentaries before this. So it's often mentioned as a new way of seeing. That it's still telling a story, but it's a new way of seeing kind of the world around us. And we'll get into the ideas of documentaries in a minute. But let's take a look at sort of like, let's put a little geography, a little context to this movie before we look at some of it. So Robert Flaherty was hired. He originally was not a filmmaker. He was an explorer. He worked for these different mining companies and also the railroad companies. And he was hired to go look for minerals, like to help them find wealth, to help them for development purposes. And so he was sent to the Hudson Bay region up here in the Arctic and Canada. And he was sent there to look specifically for minerals. To do that, you need to rely on local knowledge. You just don't go randomly looking around. You can ask somebody like, hey, have you seen this specific type of looking rock? Where have you seen this? You know, and then try to narrow down your search that way. So he found word that there's some ore deposits on Nashapoka Islands here. And so he actually went to these islands and mapped them looking for the ore deposits. And this is kind of unique that today Nashapoka Islands is called, can you see it? This is my current Google Maps. What's the name of the islands today? Flaherty Islands, yeah. They renamed it after Robert Flaherty. And this is where he was, and he lived in the fur camps and documented and had film and was taking like film of the daily going-ons, if you will, the daily life in this fur camp with the indigenous cultures. And it's kind of interesting, and it's that the first time that he actually did this, you remember all the, I don't know if you've seen this, all the early film material was like this highly flammable stuff. So he actually shot a ton of film, and then it all burned up. But some people saw it and was like, that was really cool. You should go back and do it again. So he actually went back a second time to actually do his documentary. So narrating Nanook. So when we look at some of the early critics that actually saw this, like think of your film critics of the day, if you will. What were some of the commentaries that came back? Well, one of them was that people and the critics would say this is a very artistic representation. It's showing, and quote unquote from one of the critics, a natural man, if you will. Natural in the sense of being a primitive, of being somebody close to nature, of living off the land, not using modern technology, of a more simple way of life would be the way that it was explained by the critics. They also saw this as truthful, like that it's a documentary. It's telling us the truth. It's not hiding anything. It's just showing daily life, ordinary activities of one man in the environment. But today, when we start looking at places in the media, the idea that we can see that these ideas, the primitive society idea, is something it's being passed off as if it's natural when we're actually talking about something cultural. So by saying it's truthful that he's an ordinary man, a natural man living off the environment, we're really setting up the binaries to begin with of modern, of being the filmmaker, Flaherty being the modern, primitive being Nanook, man versus environment. That kind of setting up these binaries, and we'll see how that this truthfulness, we'll start breaking that apart and seeing that it really wasn't all that truthful. So let's start with, what is the story about? We follow Nanook around. We meet his wife. We meet his children. We're first introduced to him on this kayak scene. And we see him doing sort of daily activities. We see him making fire, building a boat, creating an igloo. We see him hunting a walrus, visiting a trading post. So let's watch a couple short clips. Let's start with, let's meet Nanook and the family. Is that your economy size kayak or what? All right, so let's do another daily activity. So I have a reason why I'm showing you the clips too. I'm setting you up, okay? Just wait for the punchline there. Probably the most famous clip from Nanook of the film itself is his encounter with the phonograph. So he goes to the trading post and he gets to see a record player. Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit about how this relates to documentary films. And the idea here is the concept of realism, that it appears to be real in the very generic sense, that it's unmediated. We're capturing things of the moment, that it's just point the camera and shoot. We don't have Adobe Photoshop back then, right? We just have what the camera picks up. So again, we're watching this unmediated expression of a primitive man, of a universal primitive man. These are quotes from early critics, reviewers. Locked in the struggle with the harsh environment. The noble savage, if you will, only hunting to get food for the family. Of struggling against this really incredibly difficult environment to stay alive. So we get this sense of a pure realism, this unmediated reality, if you will, right? And it's interesting too, even Flaherty's wife calls it that the people that you're watching, they're not acting, they're just being. We're seeing things as they unfold. So some of the critiques, like the academic critiques, some of them looking back at that period, one would be, more a sympathetic one would be like, well, this is an example of participatory documentary, that the director himself is participating. Remember, he went there to look for minerals. He actually lived up there for 2 years. I think he visited home once in the Chicago area once during this period. So he was up there for a long time. It's like him participating with the culture. And we're getting clips of that specific era interacting with the indigenous culture in the Hudson Bay, right? A more critical view could be saying, no, this is just colonial filmmaking. This is kind of re-projecting that primitivist myth that we're forging this complete westernized view of this mythical past, that we're getting the authentic primitive as a Western person would see it, right? And this further justifies the white superiority,